So connected here today are participants and friends of the Laudato Si Action platform. For those who may be hearing about it for the first time, the platform was inspired by Pope Francis's 2015 encyclical letter, Laudato Si, on care for our common home, which he directed not only to Catholics, but to all people. Laudato Si is Latin for praise be to you, and comes from St. Francis's canticle of praise to God for his beautiful creation. In the letter, the Pope laments the struggles faced by our sister Earth right now, and invites us to follow in St. Francis's footsteps by immersing ourselves in wonder and awe of nature, which makes us feel united with all that exists. From there, we can discover ourselves not as masters, but as siblings of creation, connected to everything and everyone. When we see our siblings suffer, we're willing to do anything to ease their pain. That's what Pope Francis's invitation is all about, to answer the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor, to ensure a healthy and livable future for our children. In Laudato Si, he writes, "The created things of this world are not free of ownership, for they are yours, O Lord, who love the living. This is the basis of our conviction that as part of the universe, called into being by one Father, all of us are linked by unseen bonds and together form a kind of universal family, a sublime communion which fills us with a sacred, affectionate, and humble respect." The work done through Laudato Si and through the Laudato Si Action platform is one way to live out those unseen bonds and offer concrete ways for us to come together as a universal family and to be a direct response to the Pope's request to seek a sustainable and integral development. The platform is a tool, and it's a global community. It's a virtual space of reflection and assessment, and of commitment and action. Those who enroll embark on a journey. Some of us are already well on our way, and some of us are at the beginning, but we are all on this road together. When people join the platform, when they enroll in it, they sign up for one of 7 sectors and work towards 7 main Laudato Si goals. The 7 sectors include families and individuals, parishes and dioceses, educational institutions, healthcare and healing, organizations and groups, the economic sector, and religious orders, provinces, and communities. Everyone in each of those sectors works toward the same 7 Laudato Si goals, which are response to the cry of the earth, response to the cry of the poor, ecological economics, adoption of sustainable lifestyles, ecological education, ecological spirituality, and community resilience and empowerment. All of the goals come together to answer the cry of future generations who are worried about having a safe and healthy planet, and they are desperately asking us to take bold action today. So now I'd like to invite Laudato Si Action Platform Director John Mundell to give us a quick greeting. John.
Good day, everyone. I'm happy to be here at our second webinar series on the Laudato Si goals. Professionally, I've been an earth and environmental scientist and engineer for over 40 years, working on projects to clean up the earth from pollution, to restore water resources. I've been closely involved with the environmental justice projects and programs throughout my career, and with the Vatican in the development of the Laudato Si Action platform from the beginning. I'm also a founding member of the Archdiocese of Indianapolis in the United States, the Creation Care Commission. The Vatican's Dicastery for Promoting Integral Human Development has been excited about the interest in this webinar series, with more than 1,000 registered in each of our first 2 webinars. That's incredible, and a great way to focus on our Laudato Si goals each month and connect with our global community. So we thank each of you for continuing to spread the word on social media and your local contacts each month. The platform itself is nearing 7,000 participants, with over 3,000 families and individuals, 150 dioceses and 385 parishes, 540 religious congregations and 700 religious communities, and over 1,000 educational institutions and 800 hospitals, healthcare agencies, businesses, and organizations worldwide. Great job, everyone, for this amazing effort. We also invite any one of you who have an interest to be part of our 7-sector working groups who help us spread Laudato Si' Action platform as a means of taking action and finding various ways to support the call for action locally and globally. I want to share a bit of exciting news for the platform. Yesterday, we helped to launch the Vatican's new publication called Our Common Home, a guide for caring for our living planet. With today's publication, all participants of the Laudato Si' Action platform will be extremely happy to have such a needed and practical resource as the Our Common Home guide that provides clear explanations in a language that most people can easily understand. The guide represents a unique collaboration between the Vatican's Dicastery and the Stockholm Environmental Institute and provides a welcome addition to the resources to combat climate change and planetary degradation. It is a rare publication that can offer such a clear and concise treatment of the global climate crisis, viewed through the lens of both faith and science, while highlighting the things that are most in need of changing and calling us all to specific actions that can have the greatest impact. Hard copies of this document are being sent to all the bishops and dioceses of the world in hopes that it will provide clear direction for continuing actions at the local level. The guide is now available in various languages at the following links shown on the slide. So let's spread the word and share as widely as possible. And now on to this month's Laudato Si' goals that we are highlighting. Adoption of sustainable lifestyles. The word lifestyle appears in Laudato Si' 17 times. It is something Pope Francis comes back to again and again to focus attention on it. Here is one of the lead-off quotes in Laudato Si'. Humanity is called to recognize the need for changes of lifestyle, production, and consumption in order to combat this warming, or at least the human causes which produce or aggravate it. So let's introduce our speakers and the title of the talks we have chosen for this month to highlight lifestyle action.
Thank you, John, for centering us on today's topic. Now I'd like to introduce the first of our main speakers, Vincent Miller. Vincent Miller is the Gudoff Chair in Catholic Theology and Culture at the University of Dayton, Ohio, in the United States. He is the author of Consuming Religion, Christian Faith and Practice in a Consumer Culture, and the editor of the theological and ecological vision of Laudato Si', Everything is Connected. Recently, he authored 2 essays in Commonweal magazine on integral ecology in an old-growth forest and attending to loss in the same forest after a catastrophic wildfire. Welcome, Vincent. We're looking forward to your presentation. So let's see if we're trying to get Vincent on screen here with his slides. Vincent, I think you're on mute still, if you can unmute yourself.
We have a photo of Vincent too.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Vincent Miller. I come to you from the University of Dayton. Dayton is a city that's built on a bend in the Miami River, which is named for the Miami peoples, one of the tribes that were driven from this land in the 19th century. Ohio is in the Midwest of the United States. Right now, it is a land of farms that provide the world corn and soybeans. Those are built on land cleared that was once forest and a lot of dispersed wetlands, which were dried out to become farms. So I live in the middle of a change world and a world that is connected to the rest of the world. That corn and soy goes into many products we consume. The topic of my presentation today is attending to the connections that sustain us in a consumer economy that hides them. I want to think about consumption not simply as a question of our individual choices, of greed, but of the relationships that it brings us into and what it might mean to deepen those relationships into relationships of responsibility, of solidarity and communion. I'm going to be speaking about in terms of 3 of the 7 Laudato Si goals. So the topic of this session is adoption of sustainable lifestyles. That is a very important goal. As John said, it appears 17 times in Laudato Si. I want to express some hesitance of thinking about that in abstraction, not connected to other questions, namely ecological, economics. When we raise questions of consumerism, that exists within a global economy. It is not something that we simply choose ourselves. These choices are constructed for us by one of the most powerful networks ever built, global commodity capitalism. So when it comes time for us to choose the lifestyle we live, those choices have already been built for us by a massive system. And so the question is not simply what we choose, but how we respond to this massive system of relationship that's been built around us, that gives us the food and everything we need for our life. So our decisions are already made by an economic system in many ways, and our responsibility is what we do with that, but also to think about the system itself. And finally, ecological spirituality. I think the entire Laudato Si action platform comes down to this. What distinctively does Catholicism bring to these questions? And so I suggest one way of thinking of ecological spirituality is a way of entering deeply into the community of creation that's held in being by the triune God. We do this because the God who made us is relational in God's very being, and all of creation reflects that relational character. And we find our lives in that God in relationship to the things around us. So I want to talk about an ecological spirituality of connection and go to Laudato Si for a key passage on that. This is paragraph 86. The universe as a whole, in all its manifold relationships, shows forth the inexhaustible riches of God. Hence, we need to grasp the variety of things in their multiple relationships. We understand better the importance and meaning of each creature if we contemplate it within the entirety of God's plan. As the Catechism teaches, God wills the interdependence of creatures. Creatures exist only in dependence on each other to complete each other in the service of each other. Let's turn then to consumption, the world we live in. What is a commodity? We live in a world of commodities. The commodity is a product of countless relationships of land, life, and labor. Think of anything you consume, from clothes you're wearing, the food you've eaten today, the computer you're watching, you're participating on this in. Each one is drawn from the land in some way, whether that's mining, extraction, agriculture, natural resources such as forests, life, right? Plants, animals, and it's also labor, the people who plant, harvest, and bring it to us. Every single thing we consume involves these relationships. But the thing about a commodity is these relationships don't appear to us. Commodities appear to us as a simple physical thing, right? I have here a cup of coffee. I have this computer. I have the shirt I'm wearing. I don't see the relationships, but I'm brought into relationship by using them. So think of clothing. As we approach Lent, chocolate is something that many people give up, right? All the relationships in chocolate, the land that it came from, the people who planted the trees, the people who harvest the beans, the people who ferment and dry the beans, the places, the factories that turn them into chocolate, the trucks and ships and planes that bring them to us, technology, the devices we're looking on. I'm going to talk about pig iron. I don't know if my face is coming through here, but I'm holding in my hand a small piece of pig iron. It looks like any other piece of pig iron in the world. This is raw iron that's smelted from iron ore, and it becomes the basis for steel that goes into most of the technology in our lives, our cars, our chairs, medical technology. I know where this particular piece of pig iron came from. On the photo on the left, that is the city of Marabá in Pará, Brazil. And if you look at the intersection that's just to the left of the middle of that image, I picked it up on the side of the road there. Countless pieces of steel are around me in my life. It's very rare that one would ever know where something comes from. I know it came from there because I was on a mission with Caritas Brazil, working on slavery and supply chains in 2014. And we were on the side of that road by a steel plant, and this small piece of pig iron was there, and I picked it up. It came from the Carajás mine, which is on the left. This is the largest open air mine in the world. As you can see, it's about 8 kilometers wide and 5 kilometers deep. It's visible from space. The steel market has slavery in it. In the country of Brazil lacks much mineral coal, so iron is made with charcoal, and charcoal is harvested from the Amazon rainforest through deforestation, with the result of deforestation. And often there's a lot of slave labor in that harvesting of the trees and turning it into charcoal. And so there's enormous national and international effort to address slavery in those supply chains. This graphic shows how you go from slave camps in the Amazon forest to blast furnaces that make pig iron, that are then shipped to steel manufacturers in the United States that then show up in the global supply chain. The key thing I want to stress here is it's how odd this piece of pig iron I have here is that I would know what's actually going on with it, right? I engage steel endlessly throughout the day. All of us do. We have no idea where that comes from. We see only the final product. We don't know these relationships behind what we're engaging. And that's what I want to talk about. So I think thinking about commodities in this way helps us rethink how we understand greed. Greed is not simply I demand more and demand that the world be destroyed for everything I have. I don't know what's happening, right? I don't ask that people be enslaved so I can sit on a chair or so that I can have a skillet, right? I simply don't know what I'm doing. And it's when I don't know what I'm doing it's hard for me to think about how much is too much. So it's not that we don't care what we are doing, although that itself is a problem. It's that we don't know what we're doing, so we can't care. This provides a way of responding. If a lack of understanding of what's going on is the problem, then attentiveness itself becomes a path of conversion. Not simply me sitting by myself and saying I should consume less, but entering into the relationships that I'm part of, becoming aware of them, and respond to them more responsibly. Let's return to Laudato Si. One of the most moving passages from the text for me is when Francis speaks of a gaze of serene attentiveness. We are speaking of an attitude of the heart, one which approaches life with serene attentiveness, which is capable of being fully present to someone without thinking of what comes next, which accepts each moment as a gift from God to be lived to the full. Jesus taught us this attitude when he invited us to contemplate the lilies of the field and the birds of the air. He was completely present to everyone and to everything. And in this way, he showed us the way to overcome that unhealthy anxiety, which makes us superficial, aggressive, and compulsive consumers. What I like about this is that it presents transformation as not something that we begin with our will, right? I decide I'm going to consume less, I'm going to be more responsible, but it begins by opening our eyes, attending to the relationships around us, seeing that we are in a world of fellow creatures and responding to them in love. That's a different path of transformation, and I find it a more hopeful one. So I'd like to propose for you, as we begin Lent, a certain kind of exercise, a way of focusing our gaze on relationships. So in addition to giving something up or engaging in some sort of ascetic practices during Lent, consider picking something important to you or to your family and working to find out what it's made from, where it's made, whose labor brings it to you. Pick something. Once you've picked something, search the company website. Look for their environmental, labor, and supply chain policies. Do they have them? Do they tell you? This is very important. The second point, it's awkward. Talk with someone from the company, call the phone number, call the customer assistant line, and ask them questions about, do they know where whatever it is made? Can they tell you where in the world it comes from? Can they tell you the labor conditions of those who help produce it? Can they tell you the environmental policies and its impact on the land? This talking with someone is important because it helps us understand the ways in which the commodities we consume don't tell us things. If you walk into a store and say, I'd like to buy this, they'd say, wonderful choice. Let me help you. You're welcome. If you ask them any questions about how something works or its qualities, there's someone there to tell you about it. When you start asking questions about where it comes from, you suddenly enter a more uncomfortable territory. And so if you talk to people about this, it's important to feel that shift. I'm an introvert. I don't like having uncomfortable conversations with people, but this is a really valuable transformation. You may not find very much in those two things. So search for news stories on the product, news stories on the company, news stories on that industry, right? Find out what these sorts of things are doing to the world. As you do this, the goal is to learn as much as you can about the relationships embedded in the product, right? So what am I doing by drinking this coffee, eating this cereal, wearing this shirt? And the spiritual question then is, how does your understanding change as you find out about the relationships in it? How does the thing change, right? How do you imagine it? Does it become deeper? This exercise is valuable even if it fails, because you experience how hard it is to know, how little information is given to us. Now you know what you don't know, what you can't know. And there's another spiritual question here. Does that change the way you think about the product, the company? It's as if you had a friend who would never tell you anything about themselves. Wouldn't you become suspicious and perhaps a little uncomfortable, right? We're surrounded by things that don't tell us about themselves. So the transformation comes from thinking about every product in our lives as the result of relationships that are hidden from us. Does that change the way you view it? Consuming anything is a hidden communion with land, life, and labor. And our task is to deepen the shallowness of consumer capitalism into the communion of all creation in God, to which we are called, to which God is calling us, to which God is moving all creation. We are made in harmony and we are being returned and saved in that community. So part of that, in a world where everything is disconnected, is to live the connections, to face the relationships in what we consume, face the goodness and face the exploitation and destruction. So that might call for asceticism, right? There might be some things that we find out are so exploitative, that are so destructive, that we will not consume them anymore. There might be things that we find out there are responsible ways to consume and irresponsible ways to consume, and we might change our behavior that way. But we're doing this not simply because it's right or wrong, but because we are entering in these relationships, and these relationships have to be open to the depths for which we are created and to which we are called. And this, I think, provides a new way to say grace at meals. Grace is prayers of thanksgiving, right? We thank God for the food we're eating. We thank God for the land, for the hands, for the lives that bring it to us. And to really understand those connections, to deepen grace, to deepen that thankfulness, and not just take the world of production as this black box that provides us with what we need without question, but to peer into the depths and see what relationships are there. Finally, I would say that this is something that the Catholic Church as a global communion can offer. Right now in this webinar, there are people from around the globe. Our primary relationship to each other in the contemporary world is through those commodity chains, right? My primary relationship to Brazil is, say, through this piece of pig iron, the iron that comes into my life and supports me. But I also have an ecclesial relationship with them, right? Caritas Brazil is there, the Brazilian Catholic Church is there, working with people who are in danger of being enslaved, working legislatively on advocacy projects, on education projects to help prevent that, to help keep people out of slavery, to help rescue people from slavery. I have a responsibility as a Catholic in another country, and I have a connection as a Catholic in another country to that work. We have ecclesial connections. And part of what Laudato Si calls us to is to deepen those ecclesial connections to connections of communion. So I hope this provides another way of thinking about consumption, one that leads to not just moral questions, but moral questions and spiritual ones as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Vincent. I was really struck about what you're talking about, this attentiveness that we need to have and to grow in that attentiveness, and that relationships are also a commodity in a way, that we need to grow in those relationships in order to get to know what relationships are behind all of the goods that we consume. So we'll see if we have some more questions about that at the end. Now I would like to introduce our next speaker, Alice Carradine from Australia. Alice is a teacher from Brisbane, Australia, a Catholic Earth Care animator for Caritas Australia, and is founder and owner of Overturn the Tables, a business offering faith formation workshops related to Laudato Si. In 2018, her Lenten journey, inspired by Laudato Si, led her to become zero waste. And since then, she has strived to adopt a sustainable lifestyle. Alice has a master's in theology and works to help families, schools, and parishes to live out the messages of Laudato Si. So Alice, will pass the microphone to you.
Thanks, Sarah. I'm just going to share my screen, which I think will cancel out yours. Here we go. So thank you to the team for having me this evening, and thank you to everyone who's listening this. Oh, sorry, it's evening for me here in Australia. For many of you, it would be day. I wanted to, first of all, pay my respects to the traditional owners or the First Nations people here in Australia, Yingari from Yugambeh language-speaking peoples here in Australia, and pay my respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging. And I want to thank Vincent as well for his presentation, because as a fellow introvert, I also find it very difficult to do some of these things. But there's so much in that presentation that I feel is going to be modeled to you through my journey, sort of in a very practical sense. So I hope that it's informative for you. So as was mentioned, my journey sort of started in 2018 at being zero waste, but I read Laudato Si in 2015. At the time, I was still at university. I was almost finished my studies as a teacher. And my mum sent me the link to the encyclical and said, you really should read this. I think this would be really quite up your alley. So I did read it. And at the time, a conversion started in my heart, but I didn't know how to transform it into action until I was sitting in a theology workshop in 2017. And there was this theologian up there in front of me, and he said, I don't think that in the encyclical, Pope Francis means to say that not recycling is a sin. And me and my 21-year-old wisdom at the time sitting there was like, I think I disagree with that statement. I said, I was thinking about the social context around sin. If you talk to my mum, to her, not wearing a hat at church would have been considered a sin when she was my age. And that to me sort of started this whole journey of thinking about being zero waste. So over Lent, I started off with a list of 40 things to do to become zero waste, which in all honesty was a mammoth task. It was really quite difficult, but really well worth it in the end, because I understood better that relationship that Vincent was talking about. I was blogging about it at the time just on Facebook and with my friends, and they said, you should write a website. You should create a website that has all your tips in it. So I did, and it's called overturnthetables.net. After a while, and I started to run formation for schools and parishes at the time, I was approached by ARC, the Australian Religious Response to Climate Change, to work with them, and then finally with Caritas Australia and Catholic Earth Care to launch the Families program linked to the Laudato Si Action platform. So part of the journey that I started on with Laudato Si started with these two particular points in Laudato Si. So section 22 and 16, where the words throwaway culture really spoke to me. At the time, to give you a bit of context, I suppose, where I was growing up in Brisbane, there was a lot of controversy around the waste that was being produced wasn't being recycled correctly. It was being sent over to China. There was a big sort of scandal. And I found that quite uncomfortable, knowing that what I thought I was doing was right wasn't then being done correctly. And so, reading that Pope Francis is calling us to challenge that throwaway culture and come into a new lifestyle, I sort of, was praying a lot, and it kind of came to me that I had to do that. I had to start changing my lifestyle for the planet. So I was driving home from Mass one day, a few weeks before Lent in 2018, and I was having a conversation with God, and he said to me, Alice, I want you to give up your bin this year for Lent. Normally I would give up chocolate. Normally I would give up my phone or something like that. But this year he said, you've been thinking about zero waste. Just do it. Just go for it. And so I wrote down these 40 things that I was going to start doing or change or fix in my lifestyle. I was going to come up with some sort of solution. So as a teacher, I had to figure out how I was going to teach zero waste. I gave up laminating, which as a teacher is something, especially here in Australia, that we do a lot of. We laminate things. I had to find a solution to whiteboard markers. As a physics teacher, I'm constantly writing on my whiteboard. So I found a brand that makes reusable whiteboard markers, refillable ones. So I've had these since 2018. And I also write a lot as well. So I transitioned from a biro to a fountain refillable pen that looks like this. I then, was looking at lots of different things as I was going through my journey. These things now, I would have done them completely differently. I bought deodorant that had been, made was more sustainable. It came in a bar form instead of wrapped in plastic. I put together a reusable kit for like my cutlery, but I purchased all these things and I probably didn't need to. I had all these things at home. So in hindsight, I would have done this a bit differently. There are still some things that I need to fine tune and find better solutions to. I still struggle with milk. Some of the nut-based milks I find really quite difficult, and toothpaste, regardless of what eco toothpaste I tend to use or create, I end up with mouth ulcers. So I'm still trying to find a solution that works for that one. And then lastly, there were some things where kind of what Vincent was saying, some things that were just too exploitive and too bad for the environment that I just had to stop them. So like no junk mail. I got a no junk mail sign for my letterbox that's been on there since. I don't buy balloons or use balloons. I don't use nail polish. I don't use plastic jewelry, those sorts of things, or buy those things. So partway through my journey of being zero waste during that Lenten period, I was coming across a lot of issues. I was really struggling. 40 things was quickly turning into 100. There was a lot of stuff that was happening quite quickly. And I was really thinking hard about where everything was coming from and where everything was going. And it was overwhelming. It was very overwhelming at the time. But then I read the scripture for one of the weeks during Lent that year, which was from the Gospel of Mark. And it was when Jesus goes into the temple and he overturns the tables of the money changers in the temple. And I realized at the time that that's what God wanted me to do in my life. He wanted me to overturn my own tables, to completely change my culture, completely change my way of thinking, get rid of my consumerism, get rid of my anthropocentrism, and start again. And it was a very painful process to be able to do that, but well worth it in the end. And I suppose to me, that was the point where I moved into an integral ecology. That was the turning point for me in my conversion. So several years on now, in 2023, I've now created my second Laudato Si plan, which I'm looking forward to uploading when the opportunity arises. I did a plan in 2022, and this year, these are just a few of the things that I'm planning to do. Some of them I don't think will come to fruition. Reducing my car emissions, for example, I thought was going to be a lot easier than what it is, but that's okay. I'm progressing there slowly, but there's my adoption of a sustainable lifestyle now includes a lot more things than just being zero waste. So for example, down the bottom there's a group that meets up every month near my house that goes and removes invasive species from bushland. It's basically, we just do weeding. Let's be honest, that's what it means. But we go in there, we remove all the invasive species to care for our local bushland. And I find that experience quite spiritual because of my connection that I had during Lent. I think having that Lenten experience specifically, during that very specific time, the time where Jesus was preparing for his own death, having his own complications, and thinking about the impact of Jesus's sacrifice for the world over the Lenten period helped me to have my conversion. I really was thinking about, what is sin? What is my sins? What are my sins now in this world on the environment? And that has changed how I see the world and my relationship with God as well. So in a simple form, I think this is basically what Vincent was trying to sort of say. And I've just kind of boiled it down to, 3 kind of questions, but this is how I now interact with every single commodity that I have. So being zero waste, a lot of people think about, where will this item end its life? Is it going to landfill? Is it going to be composted and renewed within the earth? What's happening to it? But to be able to think about that, often we have to think about where do these items come from? And they're the hardest questions to deal with. So most of the time, I don't like the answers about where do things come from. And I have had to really think about and change my practices on how I do that. But I also think about, do I actually need this item? Is it useful to me? What is it being used for? Is it being used for a good thing? So these are some of my responses. Many of you would probably have some form of reduce, reuse, recycle framework within your context. That's definitely a tagline here in Australia that gets used. But this is kind of an expanded version. So I refuse a lot of things. In Australia, they often give out Mentos at professional development workshops, and I just say no, I can't do it. It's wrapped in plastic. Sorry. I reduce the amount of clothing, homewares, electronics that I buy. I reuse my makeup wipes if I'm wearing makeup, and my water bottles as well. I refill a lot of things, and I can actually show you. I'm hoping I have enough time. Yeah, I can show you a few of them. So, for example, these are some almonds from here in Australia. So I take this jar to one of the local shops, and they're very kind to weigh the jar and write the mass of it on the top. And then they fill the jar with almonds, flour, pasta, rice, anything that can kind of go in a pantry, they can fill. And I then pay for the contents of the jar and then take it home, which is really cool. I also do the same if I'm buying meat for my dogs. I will take a container to the butcher and have to overcome my introvertedness and ask them to put some meat in the container for me. I have a compost at home. I recycle anything else that I can't use. I buy a lot of things secondhand. I buy things package free, and especially my food, I try to buy as locally as possible. In Australia, that's quite tricky because we're such a big country, and local can still mean 100 kilometers. But yeah, that's kind of the goal. I try to have a plant-based diet where I can. I make a lot of things. So for example, this is my deodorant here. It looks like this. So it's like a paste that gets rubbed on. I have also some hair wax that my husband uses. That looks like this as well. So in a container that we had before, and I just refilled it with the wax that I made. So I know all of the ingredients that are in those items. I know where those ingredients have come from, and that in itself has helped me to build that relationship.
Great.
So, sorry,
I'll
Sarah, am I
ask
going
you to
over
wrap
time?
it up real quick. Yes. And
That's
then
okay.
maybe
That's all
time
right.
for one or two questions.
For sure, we can do that.
But these were great examples. I think actually this is what many of us are interested in. So thank you so much for sharing also that list of 40 ways. I feel like my Lenten theme needs to be overturn the tables, but also like in my own life, because I think you start with one step but there's always like one more thing to do. Okay, now what can I do? How can I grow in that attentiveness? So thank you.